In 1910, a fellow called Glenn H. Curtis was given a contract by the United States Navy to build an aeroplane that could be launched from surface ships, mainly battleships and cruisers. And he developed an aircraft called the Pusher. And in 1911, a young naval officer named Eugene Ely flew the Pusher off a cruiser called the USS Birmingham and landed it on a nearby beach. The flight deck was a number of planks laid over the bow of the ship, so very rudimentary. But from that, the Americans decided that they could look at putting aircraft onto ships. The British also did, but the British concentrated on putting them on cruisers and battleships, their big capital ships. The Americans decided they wanted ships that were purpose aircraft carriers. At the outbreak of World War II, the United States Navy had 8 aircraft carriers. By the cessation of hostilities, they had 153 of various shapes and sizes. Since World War II, the prominent naval power in the world is the US Navy. The centrepiece of their sea power projection is their aircraft carriers. There are a number of types of aircraft carriers. You'll hear these terms. A catabar is a catapult-assisted takeoff but arrested recovery. There's a number of carriers around the world that are catabars. All the American carriers are catabars, and there are a few others as well. Stowbar is a short takeoff but arrested recovery. The aircraft only needs a short run, but has to have cables to pull it up when it lands. STOL, short takeoff and landing. These are smaller ships where the aircraft can take off on its own volition and land as well without having to be arrested. The STOVL is a short takeoff and vertical landing. These are coming into vogue these days. And VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing. There's a number of these around. The short takeoff carriers, however, have a limitation. These are the ships you'll see with a big ski ramp at the front. The aircraft, therefore, have to have a limited fuel and weapon load. So they're shorter range type of stuff. Yes, they're the types of aircraft carriers that are around today. There are a number of countries that operate aircraft carriers. I will point out that currently there are 37 operational aircraft carriers in the world, of which the US Navy operates 21. The US Navy, by the way, is the second largest air force in the world. There's 4 of the short takeoff type of carriers. The top left is the Liaoning, which is the Chinese carrier. It was a Russian carrier that they spent 9 years converting. They've now built another ship called the Shenyang, which is a Chinese designed and built ship. Top right is the Indian Vikrant. The Indians also bought a Russian aircraft carrier. They thought they were getting a $600 million investment, and $3.5 billion later, they managed to get it going. So they built their own. Bottom left is the Giuseppe Garibaldi, an Italian aircraft carrier. You see the unique type of ski ramp and the flat platform deck. And the bottom right are the 2 British carriers, Queen Elizabeth and Prince of Wales, all short takeoff carriers. The first carrier in the US Navy was the USS Langley, and she was a collier called the Jupiter. They converted it to an aircraft carrier, and it served from 1921 until it was sunk in the Battle of the Java Sea in 1942. Only 14,500 tonnes, 165 metres, carried 36 aircraft. They're the top 2 images, by the way. The bottom 2 images are the next 2 aircraft carriers, the Lexington and Saratoga. These ships were laid down in 1918 as battle cruisers. At the end of World War I, their construction was halted, and in 1922, the London Naval Conference outlawed battle cruisers. So the US Navy built these as aircraft carriers. You can see in the bottom left, the Lexington still has the 8-inch guns from the battle cruiser. The Saratoga, bottom right, has the more utilitarian 5-inch 38 calibre guns. The Lexington was sunk in the Battle of the Coral Sea in 1942. Saratoga survived the war and was scrapped in 1946. The next carrier, top left, is the USS Ranger. She was the first ship in the world to be purpose-built as an aircraft carrier. You notice she's got the 6 funnels, 3 either side. They folded down when they were flying. She was 18,000 tonnes, 220 metres, carried 76 aircraft. She was in service from 1934 until 1946. During World War II, however, she was used as an aircraft ferry rather than an operational aircraft carrier. The next three are the very famous Yorktown class, the Yorktown, Enterprise and Hornet. These ships were all built from 1938 onwards, 25,000 tonnes, 245 metres in length, carried 90 aircraft. Yorktown was sunk at the Battle of Midway. Hornet was sunk off Santa Cruz Islands. They had a one-off aircraft carrier in the top left. It was called the Wasp. She was built in 1942, primarily a British design. You can see the vertical funnel, which was so typical of the British aircraft carriers. Initially, she operated in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean with the British carriers, but she went to the Pacific and was sunk off San Cristobal at the end of 1942. Bottom left is the USS Princeton, the Princeton class. These were what were called light carriers. They were built on a cruiser hull, Cleveland class cruisers under construction. They halted their construction and converted them to aircraft carriers. They served very successfully in World War II. Two pilots that served on these ships were G.H.W. Bush and Gerald Ford. On the right are the two types of escort carriers. These were built on merchant ship hulls. The top ones, the Bogue, they were mainly used as aircraft ferries. The Commencement Bay class on the bottom, they were used for escort carriers with convoys crossing the Atlantic. They were very successful in combating the U-boat menace. From 1941, or 1942, early 1942, the Americans started building the Essex class, projected to have 32. They only ended up building 24. These were known as the workhorse of the fleet. 36,300 tonnes, carried 100 aircraft, 270 metres in length. As you can see, they were heavily armed. They had 12 5-inch 38 calibre guns. At this point, aircraft carriers were still considered to be part of the battle fleet as such and had to keep up with the battleships and cruisers and get in all the engagements. These ships were the single biggest class of aircraft carrier ever built. The aircraft component they carried was called the Sunday Punch. A Sunday Punch is a boxing term, which is basically one big knockout blow. And that's what these aircraft were considered to be able to deliver. 54 F-6F Hellcat fighter aircraft, 15 Dauntless torpedo bombers, 15 Avenger fighter bombers, and 15 Helldiver dive bombers. You see the Helldiver's designation is SB-2C. They were a very unwieldy aircraft, difficult to fly, and the American carrier pilots referred to them as a son of a bitch second class. From 1950 to 1953, the carriers started to embark more modern aircraft. The F-7F Tiger Cat and the A-1 Sky Raider, radial engine fighter and attack aircraft. They also flew the first jets, the F-9F Panther and the F-2H Banshee. The Panthers served through Korea. There's a very good movie to see called The Bridges at Toko-Ri with William Holden. It shows you a lot of the carrier operations flying the F-9F. Some of the pilots that flew the F-9F during Korea included John Glenn and Neil Armstrong. Because they'd invested so much money, time and effort into the Essex class at the end of World War II, rather than build new carriers, they decided that they were going to upgrade the existing Essex class. You'll see as built, they had the radial deck, 3 elevators, 2 on the centreline, 4 and aft, and 1 on the port side. The ship characteristic board oversaw the development of the carriers, and the 27A project saw the port side elevator strengthened, the 5-inch guns were removed, the superstructure was streamlined with the funnel canted at 45 degrees to take the exhaust gases away from the flight deck. The SCB-27C moved the centreline aft elevator to the starboard side and replaced the wooden flight deck with an aluminium flight deck. The 6 ships underwent the 27C between 51 and 54, and 8 ships underwent the 27A between 49 and 53. There are a couple of carriers that were left uncompleted at the end of World War II, one of which was Antietam, number 36, and she was completed with an angled flight deck, angled at 5 degrees, but she still had the 5-inch guns, the 8 5-inch guns. The carriers that had undergone the SCB-27A conversion underwent an SCB-125 between 1952 and 1955. This included the establishment of a angled flight deck, the replacement of hydraulic catapults with steam catapults. The 27C ships were all converted to a 125 as well, but as you see, the starboard elevator aft and the forward centerline elevator was enlarged to hold the bigger aircraft. 34 is the Oriskany, USS Oriskany. She was completed as a 125A, which moved the starboard elevator forward, had more powerful catapults, bigger capacity for fuel and for aircraft carrying. This is the USS Antietam, as you see, completed with an angled deck, but still the 5-inch 38 caliber guns and the open bow. The aircraft you see on the deck are called T2 Buckeyes. This is a training carrier. It ran out of Pensacola in Florida and trained the Navy pilots. USS Essex, which had undergone a 27A. You see the angled flight deck, the enclosed bow. You can see the funnel has been canted down 45 degrees. Here she's carrying a load of aircraft. That large aircraft in front of the superstructure is called an AJ-2 Savage. The US Navy wanted the Savage to be the deliverer of nuclear weapons, and they laid down another carrier called the United States to carry these things. They wanted to carry about 120 of them. But the head of the Air Force was a fellow called General Curtis LeMay, and he lobbied Congress and said that the American nuclear arsenal should be the sole purview of the US Air Force. And the Navy was forced to scrap the under construction USS United States and hand over all the nuclear weapons and so on to the Air Force, which wanted to deliver them via very large bomber aircraft. This instigated what was called the Revolt of the Admirals, and 9 senior admirals bypassed Congress and went straight to President Eisenhower and said, "This is wrong. We have submarines that can deliver ballistic missiles." And Eisenhower decreed that the nuclear arsenal would have a 3-pronged operation. 1 delivered by Air Force aircraft, 2 delivered by Navy submarines, and 3 by land-launched missiles from the US. The AJ-2 Savage never really went anywhere. From 1953 to 1960, however, they developed some of the better jets used. Top left is an F-9F Cougar, which is basically a Panther with swept wings. Given the success of the F-86 Sabre in Korea, a navalised version called the FJ-3 Fury was put into service. Bottom left is what I consider to be one of the best fighter aircraft ever built, the F-3H Demon, the grandfather of the Phantom. And bottom right is the F-4D Skyray, commonly known as a Ford. This is the USS Bennington, built as the 27A. They became anti-submarine aircraft carriers. They were primarily tasked with anti-submarine warfare. You see there the raked funnel carrying the helicopters, anti-submarine aircraft. She carried an aircraft called a Tracker, top left, which is an anti-submarine aircraft developed specifically for anti-submarine warfare. She has what's called a Lear light, the big searchlight on the wing, and under the tail you can see a little knob that is called the MAD, the Magnetic Anomaly Detector. That extends 12 feet out and will detect any magnetic anomaly in the water, hopefully a submarine. They also carried another sensor called a sniffer, and what the sniffer would do was sample the air to see if there was any diesel particulate in it, and if they found it, they would follow it. They also had the SH-34 Seabat helicopter, which was basically a Westland Wessex built under the Sikorsky brand in the US. A4 Skyhawks for protection. and a new innovation called an E1 tracer. The tracer was basically a tracker, cut the tail down, put vertical stabilisers on the tail planes, and put a whopping great radome on top that carried what was called an APS-82 radar. The APS-82 radar had a range of about 280 nautical miles. These aircraft would fly off the carrier, go about 150 miles out, and project a further 200 plus miles of radar coverage. These aircraft developed over the years, and I'll show you some later on. This is the USS Hancock. She was a 27C class carrier, and they were designated attack carriers, fighter aircraft, bombers, and so on. You can see she's got a vast array of jet fighters lined up on the flight deck, 4 tracers lined up, and the large elevator forward. Interestingly enough, the Hancock served until 1993, and when the 1983. When the Australian Navy decommissioned HMAS Melbourne in the 70s, the Americans offered the Hancock to us as a replacement. But the Navy in its great wisdom said, no thanks, we'll do it our own way. And nothing happened. From 54 to 64, they carried the A4H Skyhawk. You see the little Skyhawks top left there? They got the hump on the back. That's an extended range fuel tank. These were developed by a fellow called Roderick Heidemann, and they were known as Heidemann's Hot Rods. Very little aircraft. Top right, F-8 Crusader, the last of the gunfighters. These were the last jet aircraft the US built specifically as air-to-air intercept aircraft. Bottom left is the F-7 Cutlass, a very innovative aircraft that suffered from a very weak engine. It never really achieved the success it should have. And the bottom right is an F-11F Tiger. The Tiger was developed from the F-104 Starfighter. Very sleek aircraft, but again, they only had a short range, didn't last that long. I put this photograph in for 2 reasons. One, I wanted to show you close up what the big carriers are like, and secondly, because I took the photo. This is in 1968, going up into the Gulf of Tonkin. You can see the USS Oriskany with her deck load of aircraft. She was a beautiful ship, good ship to work with. In 1943, with the success of their aircraft carriers, the Americans wanted to build some bigger ships, so they built 3 Midway class, the Midway, the Franklin D. Roosevelt, and the Coral Sea. These were big ships, 60,000 tonnes, 295 metres, carried 180 aircraft when they were built. As you can see, they've got 5-inch guns lined up down the side, 3-inch guns in the bow, huge big funnel. Again, after the war, the Americans wanted to upgrade these because they were still carrying World War II and Korean War aircraft. The F-4F Corsair, top left, the F-8 Bearcat, top right, the Helldiver, still in service, and the Banshees. They carried 60 Banshee jet aircraft, but the Americans wanted to upgrade them to an all-jet carrier. So they underwent what was called a 110 configuration. You see on the left is the original Midway design, axial deck, 3 elevators, 2 catapults. Under the 110, you can see they've got the larger elevator forward. The catapults have been extended by 40 feet for the bigger aircraft, and they've got another catapult on the angle, and again the 3 elevators. In 1966, a second modification was mooted, and as you can see on the right, would only have the 2 catapults, the 2 elevators starboard side and 1 port side. That portion protruding out of the port side with the elevator on it was designed to be removable. The modification was costed at $68 million, but when the Midway finished it had cost over $200 million. So they decided not to do the other 2. And the Midway was the only one that was converted. But she flew the ubiquitous F-4B Phantom, the top left. Top right is the A-5 Vigilante. This was their nuclear bomber. This thing could carry 2 nuclear bombs, a massive aircraft. Bottom left is the Intruder, the Iron Tadpole. You see they've got the bulbous nose and the sleek body. These are a ground attack aircraft. And bottom right is the A7A Corsair II attack aircraft. These were known as sloughs, short little ugly fellows. Well, that's what we called them. By 1990 they were flying the FA-18 Hornet, the EA-6A Prowler, top right. That's an electronic intercept aircraft. They would fly out ahead of the fleet and pick up radar and radio transmissions on that large antenna on the top of the tail. Bottom left is the S3 Viking anti-submarine aircraft. This one has been configured as an aerial tanker. You can see it trailing the refuelling boom behind it. And the SH-3 Sea King helicopters. There's an idea of the flight deck of the Midway coming and going. The flight deck was 1/3 bigger than the other two Midway class carriers. She was a very, very big ship. Carried 76 aircraft, top-line jet aircraft. In 1955, with the revolt of the admirals being successful, the American Navy resumed building supercarriers, and they came up with the Forrestal class. There were 4 of these. They served from 1955 to 1998. 80,000 tonnes, 326 metres long. They carried a variety of aircraft over the years. As they were modded, the aircraft were upgraded. The number of aircraft varied between 70 to 100. This one you see here is the USS Ranger. You see the 5-inch 54 calibre guns on the port side, angled flight deck. The angled flight deck is now at 7.5 degrees, and an array of aircraft on the deck, including the A3 Sky Warrior heavy bomber. They carried the F3 Demon, the F4D Sky Ray, the A4 Skyhawk, and they also had the A1D Sky Raider, the piston engine aircraft. These were called coins, counterinsurgency aircraft. They could get out on a target and stay there for quite a while. In 1961, they went one step further and built the Kitty Hawk class, 3 of these ships, the Kitty Hawk, the Constellation and the America. 83,000 tonnes, 326 metres, 75 aircraft they would carry, but they carried the latest model aircraft. Give you an idea of the comparative size, that's a Navy tanker alongside it. Of course, you couldn't go past the USS Enterprise, 1961 to 2012, still holds the distinction of being the longest warship ever built, 1,123 feet. The mast was that tall she could not fit under the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Nuclear powered. You see the superstructure with the big slab arrays of the SPS 32 and 33. Again, 95,000 tonnes, very powerful aircraft carrier. There she is on her last voyage, going home to be decommissioned. The HH-60 Seahawk helicopter hovering above it. You can see the aircraft on the deck. A lot of people say to me, look how rusty it is. And if you think that's rusty, you've not been to sea on a ship. That's about 2 days worth, I'll tell you that. In 1968, the Americans went back to building a conventional carrier. And this is the last conventional carrier they built and the smallest carrier they built, the USS John F. Kennedy, 84,000 tonnes, 320 metres, carried 80 aircraft. She was a unique ship in that the funnel was canted to the side to move the gases away from the flight deck. These ships all carried the F8 Crusader, the F3 Demon, the A4 Skyhawk and the A3B Sky Warrior. The bottom left Sky Warrior was a long-range heavy bomber. In later years they became tankers and reconnaissance aircraft. From 1970 to 80 they flew the F4H Phantom, the A6E Intruder called a Tram, the A7 Skyhawks and a newer version of the Tracer called the Hawkeye. The radar on top of the Hawkeye here was an APS 115, range of 400 nautical miles, crew of 10. And then of course 1975, the big nuclear carriers Nimitz. I built 10 of these. The Nimitz class were unique, 106,000 tonnes, 330 metres in length, carried up to 90 aircraft. You can see the size of the flight deck there. That's the Ronald Reagan, the second last of the Nimitz class, showing you the vast flight deck, the number of aircraft they have on it. From 1980 to 1990, they flew the F-14 Tomcat. They carried about 45 to 50 of those. The A-7E Corsair II. Bottom left is an A6 or a KA6 tanker. They called these a Texaco. As you see, they had the aerial refuelling capability. They were simply a converted A6 attack aircraft. They converted the bomb bay into a sealed fuel tank. And the bottom right is an S3 Viking. These replaced the trackers as an anti-submarine aircraft, a little jet-powered aircraft. They also starred in a role called the COD, the carry-on deck. These were their postmen. These are the aircraft that would go from ship to ship. They would go from ship to shore and back again, taking passengers, mail, you name it, spare parts. They were designed to be able to carry a jet engine inside them. By 1990, they were now flying Hornets. The Hornet became the single aircraft. Rather than have half a dozen different types of aircraft on board, they only wanted one airframe, and it's the Hornet, which reduced the crew. In the United States, any settlement, any village, town, whatever, that has a population in excess of 5,000 has to have a zip code, a postcode. All the American aircraft carriers have their own postcodes because they carry between 5,000 and 6,000 people. Top right is the S3 Viking and an ES3A Shadow. The Shadow, again, is a surveillance aircraft that'll go up and listen for radio communications and so on. Bottom right is an EA6B Prowler. This is a variant of the Intruder. They have four aircrew inside. Again, the large dome on top of the tail is a receiver for radar and communications. And you see under the wing she's carrying an ALQ-99, what's called an ECM pod. If you look closely, you can see they've got a little propeller on the front because that gives them their own power. They are jammers. What this aircraft will do is fly out in front of the attacking formation and jam all the radars and communications so that the planes are undetected. Bottom left is the E-2D Hawkeye. This is an upgrade on the E-2A. These are now flying off the carriers still, the Hawkeyes. Most expensive aircraft in the American fleet, $300 million each, as opposed to the Hornet, which is around about $60 million. And when you consider they've got thousands of these things, they've got a few bob invested in it. The newer carrier is the Gerald R. Ford class. I like this aerial view because you can see the jet blast deflectors behind the aircraft, and you can see how the jet blast has scorched them, and you can see the rubber on the deck between the three arrestor cables where the planes land. When the planes launch, when the aircraft launch, on their nose wheel they have a hydraulically controlled bar that will drop down. It's got a little hook on it, and as the plane moves onto the catapult, that hook will slot into the actual drive unit. A crew member on the deck will then fit what's called the holdback bar, and that'll connect to the rear of the nose wheel, and as the aircraft moves forward onto the catapult, that will hook onto the actual arrestor part. When the aircraft is launched, the holdback bar will automatically fly off, and the catapult will fling the aircraft forward, and as it goes up, the pull bar will actually fold back up into the undercarriage. It's quite you can get onto YouTube and have a look at some of the videos on it. It's quite fascinating to see how they do it. These ships do not have steam-powered catapults, they have magnetic catapults. And they fly the FA-18EF Super Hornet, the F-35 Lightning. The Lightnings run out at around about $90 million a unit. The EA-18G Growler. This replaces the Prowler. This is a Hornet with the ALQ-99s under the wing. And the bottom right is an aircraft called a CVM-22 Osprey. This is a tilt rotor. It takes off like a helicopter. Once it's airborne, the motors tilt forward and it flies off like an aeroplane. It has to do that because the actual rotor blades are 8 metres in diameter and they would hit the deck if it landed like that. This is a short takeoff vertical landing type of aircraft. Here is the USS John C. Stennis. Now you can see there's a helicopter up and she's just launched 2 fighter aircraft. This is part and parcel of their operation. The air operation for the carrier is very regimented. First off will go the SARS, the Sea Air Rescue, 2 helicopters, 1 either side. They go about 5 nautical miles out. Just hang back. If a pilot goes in a drink, they'll pick them up. Off will then go the CAP, the Combat Air Patrol, 2 fighters. They will take off, as you see on the Stennis. They will climb to about 60,000 feet and gradually spiral out to about 200 nautical miles. They're the intercept aircraft. If anything's coming in, they can be vectored to attack it. The AWACS will now go off. This is the Hawkeyes. 2 of those will go off and they will fly out to the target area. Inside the Hawkeye, they have a series of air controllers. Their radar coverage will cover the battleground they're going to attack, and the people inside the plane are basically air traffic controllers. They're vectoring the aircraft in to attack the various targets. And off will go attack group 1, 24 attack aircraft. Actually it'll be 25. The first one off will stay. That will just, again, fly around. Here's the spare. If something happens, he'll take the place of the one that's had to pull out. These aircraft will hang around the carrier until they're all airborne, and then they'll head out in one group, out to the target area where they'll be vectored by the AWACS onto the attack targets. Up will then go CAP 2, the Combat Air Patrol. 2 more fighters will go up to 60,000 feet and spiral out. The 2 at the front, the CAP 1s, will now spiral back in. Attack Group 2, if they're needed, will go off, 12 to 24 attack aircraft. If they're not needed, so be it. Off will then go the refuelling group, 2 to 4 aerial tanker aircraft. They will go out and refuel the attack aircraft as they're on their way back. And then the reconnaissance aircraft. Now, they may not use a reconnaissance aircraft. They can do it with satellites, and these days they use drones to have a look at the area they've just hit. Supplementing their carriers are what are known as the Brown Water Navy, the Gator Navy, their amphibious fleet. The amphibious fleet is a navy on its own, if you like. This is a WASP class, 1989 they came into service. There's 6 of them, 41,000 tonnes, 250 metres in length. They carry about 25 aircraft. You can see this one's got the Ospreys on it and the Viper helicopters, a couple of Sea Stallions. Inside the hold there, or inside the ship, are 4,000 fully armed combat marines ready to go. In the well deck, they have landing craft air cushion. We call them hovercraft. Each LCAC, as they're called, can carry 2 Abrams tanks. They'll have the helicopters go off with the troops and so on. This is the America class amphibious ship. Again, they've got 8 of these. And you can see these ones have got the CVM-22s. They also have an MH-53 Sea Stallion. They have a few of those on board. Again, they will have 4,000 armed marines on board, ready to go. This is the Macon Island, USS Macon Island. As you can see with the stern, it's got that drop down stern. They'll flood the sides and that will drive the air cushion vehicles and the landing craft to hit the beach. They'll have, this one has AV-8B Harrier aircraft, as you can see, and a Sea Knight called a Vertol helicopter. These ships fly the AV-8B Harriers, vertical takeoff and landing or short takeoff and vertical landing. They also carry on the bottom left is the F-35B Lightning. These are short takeoff aircraft. As they roll down the flight deck, a large fan, you can see the flappers opened, will push the nose of the aircraft up so it doesn't need a great length to run, and off they go. Now they retail about $90 million each, so they like to look after them. The Sea Stallion helicopter on the top right, this is their main assault helicopter. You can put 40 Marines into there. To give you an idea of the size of the helicopter, you can see the gunner at the starboard door. These are very long range helicopters. They also have an aerial refuelling capability. And the bottom right is the Viper, which is a helicopter gunship. As you can see, they Hellfire missiles, Zuni pods, and so on. These are designed to be a self-supporting combat unit. They can actually put the Marines ashore, give them air support and ground support. As I said, they're also going into drones. Top left is an MQ-25 Predator. That is a mainly reconnaissance drone. Top right is a Shark. That is a short-range reconnaissance drones. They fly off the amphibious ships, so they can go to the nearby beaches. The bottom one is an MQ-25 Stingray. Now, as you can see, it's being used as an aerial tanker to refuel aircraft on the way in. There's one refueling an F-35. Saves on pilots, don't have to pay them. That's the way of the future, is the drones. Now, as we all say, if the number of landings equals the number of takeoffs, it's been a successful flight. But that's not always the case. That's an F-7U Cutlass crashing on the deck of an Essex class aircraft carrier. You can see the pilot has left. He's up in the top left-hand corner there. He's decided he doesn't want any part of this. Unfortunately, most aircraft accidents on aircraft carriers are fatal. And that is the US Navy, aircraft carriers, naval aviation. So any questions, folks? Yes, sir. Again, it's quantity versus quality. The Chinese aircraft carriers are quite capable. They fly an aircraft called a Shenyang 35, a vigorous dragon, they call them. They're basically a Russian knockoff, but they're still, you can't turn your back on anybody. You have to assume that the enemy has at least your capability. I guess in future years the Chinese will become better and better and better at it. But the US Navy has had experience in operating aircraft carriers from 1930 onwards, and they've perfected it. They've got it down. I remember some years ago an American Navy pilot crossed deck to the Russian carrier, and the questions he was asked were things like, why do you get paid so much? How can you land at night? Where do you get your spare parts from? These things you've got to look at, the support facility for the aircraft, the maintenance of them and so on. And that is paramount. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to buy a motor car and drive it for the next 20 years. You have to have it serviced, you have to have the tyres changed, and it's the same with the aircraft. Yes, sir.
Can you explain to us the American Navy flying units? They call them VF.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Now, this has the potential to open into a huge discussion. The US have what they call a nomenclature designator. Everything has letters and numbers. For ships, for instance, a BB is a battleship, a CC is a cruiser, a DD is a destroyer, and so on and so on and so on. Aircraft are called a V. VH is helicopter, VF is a fighter, VA is attack, and so on. But they have squadrons. You might have VFA, okay, that's aircraft, fighter, attack. They can be used as a fighter aircraft or as a ground bomber type aircraft, which is the Hornet, which they can do. They might have a VAQ. Now Q is basically a combination of purposes that can be used for a number of things. So VAQ is an attack aircraft that can be used for something else, like the tankers, like the prowlers and so on. The prowlers will fly out of a squadron called a VAQ because they're an attack aircraft that's been adapted for another purpose. VH is helicopter, and so on and so on. Okay, an ejection seat. I guess you're all familiar with a company called Martin Baker who make ejection seats, but there's a number of manufacturers. An ejection seat is basically, it has a like a little rocket motor under the seat, and if the pilot figures he's in any problems, you might notice on the aircraft they have above their head is a metal ring attached to the seat. It's yellow and black stripes. and they'll simply grab that and pull it. It's called the halo, and that will activate the rocket motor, which will blow off the canopy and shoot the seat out with the pilot still strapped to it. Underwater, there are various ones that they can use. Some of them might have a pod that can be released, so the entire cockpit section is released and floats to the surface. One of the things you do in the Navy these days, and I've done it several times, is called Hewitt, which is a helicopter underwater escape training. They basically have a big swimming pool with a framework above it. They have a helicopter, you get into it, and they'll tip it upside down and drop it into the water, and you've got to get out. You can't have an ejection seat there, so you just, away you go. It's pretty basic. But, you know, the first time you do it, you think this is the end of life as I know it. But as soon as you get to the surface, you know, woohoo, do it again. But there are a number of ways you can get out. This is why they're trying to go to drones, because they're not having to worry about losing a pilot. The pilots are going to get out, they'll give them every chance. They make little pods for them. The F-111 had a pod. They were just detached from the aircraft.
The first successful underwater ejection from an aircraft flying off a carrier was the British Western Wyvern.
Yes.
In late 40s, maybe early 50s.
Yes.
So they were just amazed that it was able to do that.
The British have had a fleet air arm for as long as the Americans have. They call it the fleet air arm, the Americans call it naval aviation. This was specifically for the American naval aviation. The British have a great history of flying off aircraft carriers and off cruisers and battleships and so on. The old string bag swordfish flying around during World War II, right up to the Falklands. But the unfortunate thing is, government, and I'm not being political here, but this is realistic, governments don't see the big picture. They say, oh, this ship is costing us so much, let's get rid of it. Well, you're not getting rid of the ship, you're getting rid of the expertise. And you're not going to get that back overnight. That's going to take a generation to come through. And that was a sad thing. I remember when we got rid of the Melbourne in the Australian Navy, we had all these pilots that didn't know what they were going to do. A lot of them ended up in the New Zealand Air Force, but well, there was no more for them to go. They were the only ones still flying the Skyhawks. Yes, sir.
Is the F-35 taking over from a lot of these aircraft? The F-35?
Yes.
Is it taking over from a lot of these aircraft you mentioned?
The F-35 is being used in a number of variations, one on the carriers where they can be catapult launched, but also with the amphibious ships where short takeoff, and the F-35Cs can do vertical takeoff and landing. Vertical takeoff it takes a lot of fuel to get off the ground. The Americans don't mind that, but they prefer to have a short takeoff and vertical landing. But the F-35 is going to be the aircraft. But the US Marines, for instance, currently fly 256 F-35s off their amphibious ships. Warfare in all its forms is changing dramatically. I mean, what you saw during the Gulf War, you're never going to see again. You're not going to have tanks out on the battlefield or anything like that. I think the war in Ukraine has shown what the drones can do, and that's the way ahead. The whole premise of the US Navy running their big carriers is they can sit hundreds of miles off and fly their aircraft in. They don't have to go anywhere near the battlefield. They're well away. Anything on the ground may not be able to get out to attack it because they've got their aircraft up protecting it. Yes, sir.
Where's your experience come from? Your experience?
My experience, I read books, I watch videos, I do a lot of things. I have a lot of interests.
You haven't served yourself?
I've served in the Navy, I did, yes. But, you know, get out of the lap dancing club and have a look at what's going on around. You know, there's plenty of interesting things to do. Plenty of interesting things to do. I have a great interest in engineering and that. I like looking at these things. The arrestor system is basically 3 cables that stretch across the deck. The plane comes down, it lowers a hook that'll grab one of the cables. preferably the middle one, and that'll pull it to a halt. They're currently developing any number of methods of doing this because I tell you what, one of those snaps, you don't want to be on that flight deck. There are a number of companies that are involved, as you say, that are looking at developing variants of these arrestor cables. What are they going to be made out of and so on. Just like a big bungee strap, you know, bang, you hook it. Like anything, they're not infallible. They're as vulnerable as any other ship. The Americans have 11 carriers at the moment. They will go to sea in what's called a battle group. The battle group will comprise not only the carrier, it will have a supply ship, it'll have several ships that are what we call Aegis ships. Aegis is a system whereby one ship can take control of all the sensors and weapons of all the other ships. So you've got one command centre. They will have at least 2 nuclear submarines in the vicinity. I hear people say, oh, they've got a submarine underneath them. Submarines are underneath, but they're not necessarily underneath the carrier. They might be 150 miles out. But remember, the submarines of today have torpedoes that have a range in excess of 50 kilometres. They don't have to get anywhere near a surface target. But no, they're pretty well protected. They tend to stay well out. They have satellites up looking after them. They know where they're going. They know what they're doing. That's the one thing I'll give the Americans. They know what they're doing, other than Trump, of course.